Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Beacon Stack webinar. Today, we will be talking about the A to Z of planning your first Eddystone Beacon pilot. Now, there are a few things in the Beacon world that kindle the kind of excitement and buzz as Google's Eddystone. And from the looks of it, Eddystone is fast shaping 2016 as the year of the Beacon. So, we're really excited to have you guys join us from different parts of the world. A quick brief on me. I'm Devika, Senior Marketing Associate at Mobstack, and I'm joined by my colleague Perry.
Thanks, Devika. It's really good to be here. I've been part of a few webinars in the past, but I think this one's pretty special because we're not only going to talk about some trends we've been seeing, but also give you a really actionable roadmap on how to get your Beacon pilot up and running in no time.
Thank you, Perry. So I know that's like a little late for a few of you who've joined us for this webinar. So without much ado, let's just dive deep in on the topic of the hour. So Perry, why don't you just quickly take us to the basics of Beacon technology?
Great. So we like to start off all of our webinars at Beacon Stack with kind of what are beacons, the Beacons 101, if you will. Many of you may already know this, but it's good to make sure everyone's on the same page jumping into things. So beacons are low-cost, low-power transmitters that are equipped with something called Bluetooth Low Energy or BLE technology, also called Bluetooth 4.0 or Bluetooth Smart. Basically, these low-cost pieces of hardware will then transmit a signal that will help a mobile device detect its proximity to that beacon itself, determine its relative location, and especially in indoor use cases where GPS signals get scrambled or they can't actually find out exactly where you are. This is a really good alternative used in proximity-based marketing as well as indoor navigation and indoor microlocation. It's important to note that beacons don't actually transmit content. Instead, this BLE signal is transmitting a series of data packets that are often identifying numbers. This transmitted signal allows that mobile device to identify that specific beacon and determine its relative location. So whether it's near or far from that beacon. And when it's in proximity to that beacon, you can set a certain rule to trigger a really interesting action, such as sending a targeted piece of content, tracking a certain metric in your offline location, among many other use cases, many of which will go in actually in tonight's webinar.
Thank you, Perry, for briefing us to the basics. Now, let's just take a quick look at the agenda for today's webinar. So if you're someone who's been following upon the news in the Beacon world closely, I'm sure you've read a score of articles on the Beacon war between Eddystone and iBeacon. And from the way things have been shaping since the beginning of 2016, it looks like Eddystone is way ahead on the path to becoming the new industry standard. So towards the beginning of the webinar, we'll take you through a few quick interesting stats and updates on the Eddystone front. Then we'll move on to why your business should choose Eddystone over iBeacon. I'm sure if you're a business who's been trying to kickstart something on the proximity marketing front, this is one question that has definitely come to your mind at some point of time. And from what we heard from our customers, while there's a lot of information online on success stories being published by media publications, and there's also a lot of buzz around the two protocols, there's very little information on things that a business needs to keep in mind when choosing between Eddystone and iBeacon. So in this webinar today, we will take you to some of the factors that you need to keep in mind when you make this very crucial decision. Then we come to the crux of the webinar, that is how to launch your first Eddystone Beacon pilot. Here we'll take you through everything that you need to know to get your pilot up and running from scratch. Then we'll follow it up with top 3 scenarios where Eddystone makes sense for your business. And then we'll end it with some of the common FAQs around Eddystone URLs. I would also like to take this moment to remind you guys of one more thing. Like we promised, we will be handing out a checklist to getting started with Eddystone beacons towards the end of the webinar. So stay tuned for 1 hour in which we'll take you to some of the very interesting stats on Eddystone front, some really exciting use cases and beacon campaigns, and of course, brief you through the details of setting up your Eddystone pilot and getting it up and running. So let's get started.
Thanks, Devika. Really comprehensive breakdown there. So without further ado, let's dive in to the first section, why Eddystone is fast becoming the new industry standard. So this is a really interesting chart. It's comparing the two beacon formats or protocols, iBeacon by Apple, Eddystone by Google, and kind of their trend over the last 4 quarters. So we've seen a really impressive rise in the popularity of Eddystone with proximity-based companies. You see, 5% in Q2 2015, jumping all the way up in Q1 2016. Less than a year later, a whole 45%. Whereas iBeacon, we've seen stagnating or even dipping down a bit. It's really exciting to see this kind of quarter-on-quarter growth with Eddystone, and I'm excited to see where it goes going into Q2, Q3, Q4 of 2016.
Wow, 45% already support Eddystone, huh? It looks like the gap between iBeacon and Eddystone is like closing really fast, right, Perry?
Right, and I think a lot of that's some of the updates that Google's recently released with Eddystone that we'll talk about a little bit later on in the webinar.
Yes. So, moving on to the next pointer, I'm sure like all of you who've been following news on the Eddystone would know that soon after the launch of Eddystone in July 2015, Google launched the or announced the Chrome browser support on iOS, and it was a really big news back then. But for a long time, we did not see any activity on the Android front. And then 6 months down the lane, in Jan 2016, they announced Chrome browser support on Android. In fact, this was one announcement that was hailed by many experts as something that would change proximity marketing like never before. And it's not surprising given the fact that it actually opened doors to like 800 million additional users by allowing them to interact with the physical web via Eddystone URL. Now, if that wasn't exciting news enough, just last month, Chrome made another announcement that their browser has passed 1 billion monthly active users. Now, if you are a business that is looking to get started with a proximity marketing campaign, and one of the primary problems or the barriers that you're facing is that you don't have a sizable mobile audience, then Eddystone is definitely something you should consider, given that it gives you direct access to 1 billion monthly active users. And that's a number that very few apps out there can beat. Right, Perry?
Right. A big thing around people's minds around Eddystone is privacy. And there's been a really interesting update with something called Eddystone EID. Eddystone EID stands for ephemeral identifiers. And basically what that is it's a privacy-focused way of tracking who's actually using the Eddystone compliant beacons. And it ensures that the broadcasting signals by the Eddystone beacons can only be identified by authorized clients. I think this is a really big breakthrough because thus far we've seen Eddystone primarily focused on businesses and the enterprise. But with Eddystone EID, I think it's a really big kind of tipping point that Google has a lot of consumer-facing applications where privacy is going to be a really big concern, and they've addressed that with this brand new, I guess, frame baked into the Eddystone protocol.
Yes, in like a matter of like 8 months, they've moved from businesses and enterprises to consumer goods. That's like an amazing pace for Google out there. And so if you think that Eddystone EID is something very exciting, Eddystone has actually, there's some new news out there because Eddystone has actually upped the game by offering 3 more data payloads. One is Eddystone UUID, which is very similar to iBeacon UUID, as in the sense that it works with native apps. Say, for example, a user walks into a Starbucks store and there's a beacon there. The beacon signal will be detected by the Starbucks app that has been downloaded by the user on his phone. And then based on the exact location of the user, it will like trigger offers based on the specific store location. Say like he's in New York and he walks into a Starbucks New York store, it'll like trigger offers based on that particular location. Now the next data payload would be Eddystone URL. Now the basic concept behind this is that it directs users, allowing them to directly move or open up a web destination address without the need for an app to convert a beacon identifier number to a web destination address. So this works really well for one-time transactions where it doesn't make sense for a user to download an app. For example, say you want to do a transaction on a vending machine, or even a user wants to access the time schedule for a bus service. It doesn't make sense for him or her to like download an app just for that. So Eddystone URL works perfectly well in those such kind of use cases. The third data payload is Eddystone TLM, where TLM primarily refers to telemetry. Now, this is something that will give you information on the status of beacon's health, that is the battery levels and other diagnostic data, and it is very helpful when it comes to fleet management. So these are 3 data payloads with which Eddystone has really upped the game compared to Apple's iBeacon.
Thanks, Devika. Always really good to get a kind of review of what Eddystone offers relative to iBeacon. Next, I want to go into, not only are there adoption rates skyrocketing, but we've also seen many large brands have actually announced or executed Eddystone beacon pilots at considerable scale. A really good example is CES 2016, Consumer Electronics Show, in which a total of 1,500 beacons were deployed throughout the convention show floor. They helped to deliver indoor navigation, indoor app messaging, gamification to attendees, and that was all through the CES mobile app. Specifically with Eddystone, they sent Eddystone URLs that, when clicked, took attendees directly into the map section of the CES app. But it was interesting. They knew that not everyone was going to have the app downloaded. So if an attendee didn't have the mobile app yet, they were taken to a web page where they could download it right then and there. So I think a lot of the conversation so far has been either I do an app strategy or I do Eddystone. But this is a really interesting case in which Eddystone was used to complement an app strategy by helping to drive downloads. Another really interesting one that we've seen was something called MyStop, which sent automated transport alerts to users via Android and iOS devices on the Chrome app as they traveled on one of several buses across London that had beacons on board. So these beacons would transmit anything from updates on the progress of their journey, maybe updates on delays or alterations to the route, according to that user's exact location. So a really good example of beacons combining with GPS location to offer really relevant knowledge to people on maybe their commute to and from work. And then lastly, one that's been announced, one I'm personally excited about as someone who likes to travel. Samsonite's new line of smart luggage will allow owners to privately and securely track their suitcases via the Eddystone EID format that we had talked about. That's all through the Track and Go smartphone app, and I have a feeling it's going to be a hit with a lot of these business flyers and frequent travelers out there.
Yes, Barry, even that's one product that I'm so looking forward to as well. Okay, so going ahead with the next section of the webinar, why your business should choose Eddystone over iBeacon. Now, this is something that most of you, I'm sure, are very interested in learning about. The first pointer that we have here is the most obvious one. That is, it does away with the need for a beacon-enabled app. I'm sure that most of you who have joined us here would agree that one of the primary barriers that you face when you're looking forward to like kickstart a proximity marketing campaign is the need to have a beacon enabled app in place. And given the edge that proximity marketing can actually give you over your competitors, it's a pity that you might have to like lose out on it just because of an app. And this is exactly something that that Google's Eddystone or Google has been planning to eliminate with its Eddystone from the very beginning. Like I mentioned before, Eddystone works well with the Chrome browser app. So if a major chunk of your audience are like iOS users, they can open the Eddystone URL on the Chrome Today widget. Whereas if the major chunk of them fall on the Android side, then they can open the URL either on the Chrome browser app or on the physical web app. And if your primary problem, like I said earlier, is a sizable mobile audience, then this is definitely something you should consider given the fact that Chrome gives you direct access to like 1 billion monthly active users. So, Perry, why don't you take us to the next point?
Definitely. This again, we're talking a lot about, do I want an app? What's my purpose? How will an app serve my purpose? And we found that an alternative to building your own app with iBeacon was to partner with a well-established third-party app. Some interesting examples we saw as success stories. Shazam, a really popular music streaming app, was leveraged by the entertainment company Fox to send relevant kind of promotional pushes on the upcoming release of their film Kung Fu Panda 3. And this was on London buses again. It seems like people using public transport in London are getting all sort of relevant information via beacons. And then also WeChat, a really popular messaging app in China, was leveraged by the Chinese jeweler Chow Tai Fook to distribute e-coupons to customers in their stores that had a certain feature on their phone enabled. So again, these are two success stories of, with iBeacon, ways that you could build a sizable audience via a third-party app by partnering with a well-established app. However, we found that many verticals still struggle to find an app that's widely used by their specific audience. So Eddystone comes in here and helps these businesses to interact with users directly by triggering URLs. And we'll talk about how those URLs can actually be used to directly engage your customers without even needing to partner with a third-party app.
Well, Perry, those were some really interesting campaigns that you mentioned there. So before we go ahead, I would like to say that we have reserved a portion at a significant time at the end of the webinar. We will be answering questions or any doubts that you have regarding any aspect on getting your pilot up and running. So feel free to don't hesitate, and feel free to type in your questions on the question section of the panel, and we will take them up at the end of the webinar. Also, before we go ahead with the next section of the webinar, I would like you guys to answer one question. That is, what is your primary concern with respect to getting started with Eddystone beacons? You can answer them in the chat window on the side. And based on your responses, we'll dig deeper into your areas of concern going ahead in the webinar so that you benefit the most from it. So we'll take a short break here where you can just type in your answers right away. Any concern that you have with regarding to getting your pilot up and running. Okay, so let's get started with the next section. That is how to launch your first Eddystone beacon pilot. Now, there's one common mistake that people usually make with respect to getting started with the pilot. That is, they start off with the use cases that they plan to implement. And that's a wrong strategy, in fact. In fact, the first and most important thing that you need to keep in mind is the goal that you're planning to achieve, or the goal that you plan to achieve with your proximity marketing campaign. Now, this could be various, this could be it's spread across a wide sector. It could be to boost in-store sales, or allow your customers to reach out to store associates for guidance, or even push personalized notifications based on past purchasing behavior. Now, if it's any of these, then you might have to work around Eddystone UUID data payload, because these are use cases where you need certain information on your customer beforehand. Whereas if you're looking to achieve something like drive nearby customers in store, or collect customer feedback at the billing counter, or even drive mobile app downloads like CES did at CES 2016, these are use cases that work very well with the Eddystone URL data payload. So based on what you plan to achieve, you might have to choose with which payload you need to go ahead with. So this is the most important step in getting started. So Perry, why don't you take us to the next step?
Yeah. After you've done a lot of this conceptualizing of what your goals are, what you want to accomplish, and then how you're actually going to accomplish that, it's important to research, evaluate, and ultimately purchase beacons. And not only beacons, but also a beacon platform to help provide the end-to-end solution for this beacon pilot. The first thing to consider when purchasing beacons is the number. A lot of people are asking us, I want to run a pilot. How many beacons do I need? It definitely does depend business to business and use case to use case. But what we've seen in general are some estimates. So for a small pilot with a limited set of people, maybe 1, 2, or maybe 3 locations max, I would say that it's probably good to have a minimum of about 10 beacons in total. And that's assuming that each location is roughly 500 square feet, and you're testing for a couple of different use cases. For larger stores or venues, say 2,500 square feet or so, you'll probably need roughly 12 to 15 beacons per store or venue. But again, this really depends whether you're trying to only target people at key hotspots in that venue, or you're trying to do more complicated use cases using the beacons in your space. Also, it's important to consider that yes, the beacons are important, but it's really important how those beacons are going to be interacting with the management platform and what features that management platform has. So we've created a little chart comparing our brand new Eddykit platform, which we'll go into in detail in a bit, compared to several other Eddystone compliant platforms out there. So as you can see, at first look, both of us offer Eddystone compliant beacons. The hardware itself are relatively similar with a few differences in power source and things like that. But a big difference comes down to the ease of use and the functionality of the platform. So when we were going back to the drawing board and in designing this new product, this Eddykit platform, we were specifically baking in feedback that we had heard from current customers who were really excited about using Eddystone compliant beacons, but were struggling to get a pilot up and running for some reason or another. So I'll walk you through a series of the features that we've included in this new platform, and it's really designed to truly be an out-of-the-box product where you don't need any developer experience whatsoever. For one, which is pretty unique, is that it's a mobile-friendly dashboard. So using a mobile device, you can actually set up your first proximity marketing campaigns. You can track certain key analytics in that platform, all from your mobile phone. Also, we've been talking a lot about URLs, but some people that are using Eddystone also really want to take advantage of the UUID feature, and they want to send more comprehensive, complexly formatted cards that still look really visually appealing. So we still do allow the functionality of content cards that are pre-formatted cards. You can have a text, maybe some image, a nice little kind of promo underneath the image to be broadcast from your Eddystone beacons as well. On the flip side, though, there are a couple new things that we really wanted to include in this platform. Were two types of forms that we've seen a lot of people wanting to use to engage people beyond just sending content. A lot of people either wanted to generate leads, gather information from people that were entering their store or physical location, and then also gather feedback in real time from their customers. So through the Eddykit platform, we allow you to really easily import a pre-built form for lead generation or customer satisfaction, and then use that to be broadcasted from your Eddystone beacons to be displayed through the Chrome browser on users' devices. And lastly, you can also have pre-configured custom URLs. And what that means is that, as we've been talking about, a key part of Eddystone is the URL payload. And so a custom URL can really be a lot of different things. It could send people, directly to your Facebook page to check in, learn more about your business. It could be a YouTube video. You could create a landing page for an upcoming product or an interesting seasonal promotion. A lot of things you can do with this custom URL functionality of the Eddykit platform.
Thank you, Perry, for taking us through all of that. Now, coming on to the next step, that is, next would be to create a float plan. Now, here, first of all, you need to choose between, or you need to choose what kind of deployment you want to go ahead with. Say you want to engage with your customers at certain specific locations in the store. Say you want to send offers at the entrance of the store, or send coupons at the billing counter. So if you want to engage with them at certain specific locations alone, you might want to go ahead with the point-based beacon deployment. And on the other hand, if you want to engage with your customers based on his or her exact location, like for use cases like navigation instance, then you might want to go ahead with the grid-based beacon deployment, which obviously involves a lot more beacons spread across the same deployment space. Now, once you've chosen between the kind of deployment that you want to go ahead with, you need to survey the space for obstacles and other challenges. Now, by obstacles, we mean anything like a metallic wall or a water body nearby, because essentially concrete, water, and metal are all opaque to Bluetooth. You might also want to look for other things like, for example, say sculptures or fountains, or even the occupancy capacity of your deployment space. Because if your space is something that tends to be or has a potential to be hugely crowded, even that can block beacon signals from reaching the user's smartphones. So you need to keep these things in mind before you decide on the points of interest where you want the beacons to be mounted. Also, two other things that you need to keep in mind is, say your beacon deployment space is very open, like a warehouse, then you might face problems trying to find a space where you can actually mount a beacon. And on the flip side, if it's like a very crowded shopping aisle with low-hanging fluorescent lights, you'll also still face a very extremely tricky situation in terms of signal reception. So you need to consider all of these factors before you decide on certain points of interest where you can actually mount your beacons, and then map them down on the floor map. And like we always say, for accuracy measures, we always recommend our customers to mount beacons from around 3 to 5 meter height above the ground. So these are some things that you need to keep in mind in terms of coming up with a very efficient floor plan. Now, Perry will take us to how to set up your Eddystone campaign.
Thanks, Devika. A lot of things that I wouldn't think to consider in terms of just actually placing and positioning my beacons. So now we're going to do something a little different. We've talked a lot about our Eddykit platform, and a crucial part is actually creating your campaigns in your beacon platform. So we're actually going to show you a brief walkthrough of the Eddykit platform, so you can see how you would be adding cards, adding these pre-formatted survey forms, etc., within this brand new product that we're releasing. First, you will see a list of all the beacons in your account. To create your first proximity marketing campaign, click on the beacon you'd like to work with. Here, you can change information about that beacon, such as its name and place, and you can create a landing page to send to users who enter its proximity. For offers and promotions, for instance, you can send a card with some text and an image, which you can preview right there on the dashboard. You can also choose to send a pre-created lead generation or customer satisfaction form to users, simply by selecting the appropriate option and pasting the form URL you've created in the blank provided. Lastly, you can send a custom URL, perhaps to an online product profile or other landing page you've created. It's quick, easy, and doesn't require any coding on your part. In the Form Responses tab, you can then easily see all the responses to your lead generation and customer satisfaction forms in one place. This includes how many visitors and responses, the form completion rate, and the actual responses that users left. Great. So I hope you enjoyed that brief kind of preview into the platform. That was definitely an overview, and we understand that a lot of you are probably interested in learning, more details about how all of this works and how you can, based off your use case, can set up that campaign in the platform. And so we're actually uploading right now a handout with more details on the specific features of the Beacon Eddy platform. So feel free to download that and take a look at your own leisure after the webinar.
Okay, now that you've received the handout, let's go on to the next pointer. That is, once you've set up your Eddystone campaign, the next you would want to check out the Beacon experience. Now, a few things that you need to check or keep in mind while checking it out here is you need to check if the Beacon triggers an action that is assigned to it exactly. This is very critical because there are a couple of instances where when a user enters a Beacon range, Beacon might fail to trigger it if you enter in a certain angle. So you might want to check if your Beacon is triggering the action assigned to it in any space around the Beacon range. Also, you might want to check if the Beacon is consistent in triggering the action across different smartphones. You could probably come up with a list of smartphones that is widely used by a consumer base and then check for each of them individually. You also would want to check out the time that is taken by the Beacon to trigger an action. This is very critical because if there's any delay in the Beacon experience, that would be something that the customer would definitely not want. And so you might want to optimize all of this before you go ahead and run a pilot.
Great. So moving on to the top 3 scenarios that we think Eddystone makes sense for your business. The first is in public spaces. A good example of this is maybe at a movie theater. You can attach beacons to movie posters to have them broadcast, say, a YouTube video of the trailer for that movie. Makes for a lot more engaging experience there in that physical location. Another similar related environment, I guess, would be for public utilities. So a really interesting example that we've seen here is in parking lots, a place where often it's hard enough to find the car, not to mention pay for the parking. We've seen beacons used at parking meters to, broadcast the URL to an online payment gateway that people can then pay with their phone rather than fumbling around with cash, and ultimately simplify the payment process for those users. And then lastly, we've seen Eddystone being really, really useful and successful in some commercial settings. So some restaurants we've seen have used them to improve the user experience of guests that are waiting in line to get in. So whether that's managing the reservation system through a URL or broadcasting certain either forms of expressing their interests or sending them interactive content through proximity marketing campaigns.
Thank you, Perry. So let's move on to the next section. That is some common FAQs that are on Eddystone URLs. These are basically based on questions that we've been receiving from our customers. So the first and the most common one is, why doesn't Chrome app on Android detect my Eddystone beacon? Now, this is primarily because Chrome app on Android fails to trigger URLs that are not secure or that don't use HTTPS. And this is not the case when it comes to Chrome browser on iOS. So there's a significant difference on the experience that you go through on both the mobile devices. So probably that's the reason, and you might want to change it to HTTPS and see, and I'm pretty sure that your Eddystone beacon will detect it. Next is, how do I manage my Eddystone URLs remotely? In fact, this is one thing that we received as a concern that is faced from one of the attendees today. So if you're looking to manage your Eddystone URLs remotely, this can be done by shortening the URL. The only thing is that instead of using a very the common tools like Bitly, we would suggest that you use something like tiny.cc, because if you're using Bitly, you cannot change the URL later on in future. So this is one very important thing that you need to keep in mind if when you're working it on Eddystone URLs. Now the next question is, can I broadcast text instead of URL? I guess it makes sense for business owners who think that a URL wouldn't be appealing to a customer and they'd rather type in some text, which is like a very catchy caption. But like I said before, the way Eddystone URL works is that it has to start with HTTPS. So you can only type in text after that. And if your customer clicks on that, it'll just lead them to an error page, which is very bad in terms of beacon experience. So if you're actually looking to like grab the attention of the user, you can actually use the meta title of the URL to type in a catchy caption. And I guess that would serve the same purpose. Serve the same purpose for you. So those were some common FAQs that are on Eddystone URLs.
Thanks, Devika. Really helpful kind of tips and tricks of Eddystone. So we've talked about it a bit already, but all of us at Beacon Stack are really excited about the release of our brand new Eddykit. The Eddykit, I think, is a really good example of kind of innovating and trying to make it as easy as possible for users to take advantage of kind of this new trend in a very product-specific way. Well, it allows unlimited user interactions in the platform. So there's access to the platform, the Eddy platform that we did a brief walkthrough, as well as the two pieces of the Beacon hardware. It also is integrated with Google Analytics, which is really useful in terms of integrating both your online and offline marketing data. There's the option of rules-based rotating URLs. And what that means is the same beacon can trigger and can broadcast different URLs depending on rules that you set. So for example, if you're a cafe or a restaurant, you can set a time-based URL that, before noon, you'll broadcast the breakfast menu, afternoon or noon to 6 p.m. the lunch menu, and then after 6 p.m. the dinner menu, without having to do anything yourself, which is really convenient and also helpful to address that issue of remote management of Eddystone beacons. Also, again, you can use a custom domain in many respects for your own business's domain. And we realize that this is kind of new territory for a lot of people. So we really emphasize prompt and consistent customer support to make sure that you can accomplish everything you want to with the Beacon Stack Eddykit. I will note that we have recently uploaded the handout, which is a checklist on how to get started with Eddystone that we had talked about at the beginning. So as you hear more about the Eddykit and you want to get started with Eddystone, feel free to download that and kind of check those boxes as you go through setting up your own pilot. As far as the Beacon Stack Eddykit, you can get this right now on pre-order for $59. So you'll save $10 off of the price of $69 if you order it on pre-order within the next week. We just posted the URL to that specific Eddykit store. But if you can't see that for some reason, it's store.beaconstack.com/pages/Eddy. But it should be there in the GoToWebinar chat section. So it's important to note that the kit itself comes with 2 Eddystone compliant beacons and gives you free 30-day access to the Beacon Stack Eddy platform. After those 30 days, after you've done maybe a small pilot or an internal demo, we have 2 different plans in terms of accessing the platform as you scale to larger pilots and eventually large-scale deployments. The first one's called the Small Business Plan, in which platform access is $9 per month for up to 5 beacons. For each additional beacon that you add, there'll be an additional $1 per month on that monthly platform subscription price. As part of the Small Business Plan, you'll get unlimited user interactions with your platform, with your marketing campaigns. There will be that Google Analytics integration that we talked about. In terms of URLs for the Small Business Plan, there'll be fixed URLs, meaning one beacon can send one URL at a time. It can't be linked to a rule like we had talked about with changing the menu depending on the time of day. Then say you're looking to scale to a much larger deployment, or you yourself are a large enterprise. We have something called the Enterprise Plan. That monthly subscription price to the platform is by custom pricing. And this is for deployments typically that are over 100 beacons, so fairly large in scale, oftentimes across different franchises or different locations. With the enterprise plan, you're also going to get those unlimited user interactions, that Google Analytics integration. But for URLs, you will have the opportunity to use rule-based rotating URLs. And in addition to forum and email support, you'll get additional phone support because we realize that sometimes it's tough to roll out large scale deployments on your own, and you need the support of a developer team. I'm hearing from my team that the audio is faint or non-existent. So please let us know if that's the case, and we'll try to sort that out before moving forward. The last two features I want to mention specifically on the enterprise plan are custom domain. So you can, again, use your business or your brand specific custom domain in that URL that you're customizing, as well as there's 99.5% guaranteed uptime SLA, which is critical, especially with a large scale deployment where you're interacting with a lot of different users through your Beacon campaign. It's important, again, to pre-order your etiquette today. You'll save $10, and you'll get all of this for $59 only. And there are actually only 31 kits left. We've already had a lot of pre-orders flying off the shelves. So act quickly, and pretty soon you'll be able to get your kit in the mail and get your first Beacon pilot and proximity marketing campaign up and running. We did a time test in our office, and we saw some people do it in less than 10 minutes. But we like to say that even with no experience at all, you'll be able to get it up and running in less than 15 minutes even without any developer experience needed whatsoever. So we want to wrap up this webinar, as we always do, with answering some of the lingering questions out there. So feel free, if you have one already, to type in your questions about the etiquette or about Eddystone more generally, beacons more generally, and we'll do our best to answer those questions as best as possible, or follow up with you if you're not able to get those answers. Great. And actually, to help us out with this question and answer session, we're bringing on our product manager here at BeaconStack, Rahul. He's here to help really dig deep into the product about beacons and Eddystone and the etiquette, and answer those questions in the best detail as possible. So take it away, Rahul.
Thanks a lot, Perry. So the first question that we have is from Randy, and he asks, what else can Eddystone do besides push content? So first of all, Eddystone and pushing content are not are two things are two separate things. Eddystone per se does not push content. It's a passive notification mechanism. So that's the first thing. It's unlike apps which actually push notifications onto browsers. That's not what happens with Eddystone. Primarily, this is done to avoid spamming users and to maintain a good user experience. That's the primary reason. But to answer this question, it actually depends a lot on your industry or a lot on your vertical that you operate in. For example, if you are into event management, you can use Eddystone to push the conference agenda to the visitors. If you are a museum, or if you are managing a museum, then you can basically push some content about exhibits. If you are into media marketing, then it could be something as simple as a movie trailer on a poster. So the goal here is to make sure that these URLs perform a single purpose. They push users to perform a single purpose action, and it has to be something which is contextual to where those users are. Moving on, the second question is from Caesar. Caesar asks, I need to make a system to track people in the industry to where they are and what they and what at what time. Can Eddystone help me? Of course, I mean, there are a lot of possibilities with Eddystone and exploring our SDKs. It actually depends on how you want to track user, whether you want to do it in the background of an app where you basically track their movements. That's possible. If you are looking to build some sort of a check-in app where you want to encourage your visitors to check into a store to redeem certain offers or to unlock certain awards, that's also possible. And if you want to do some sort of analytics on top of it, for example, figuring out heat maps or figuring out intensity of people at certain points of interest, even those things are possible. So depending on your use case, there are a lot of possibilities. The third question that we have is from Ismail. He asks about what is the difference between regular beacon stack beacons and the etiquette, and what are rotating URLs. While Beacon Stack platform is aimed at mostly enterprises, mostly at businesses that are looking to build apps, that are looking to leverage the platform and uh, the inbuilt SDKs and APIs, Eddystone, the Etiquette is primarily targeted for small and medium businesses, which are not looking to develop an app or distribute an app, or go through the hassle of making their visitors download an app. So this is like a very lightweight solution that we have built for small and medium businesses that can get started without practically not having a developer, and they can get started in as less than as 15 minutes and still explore the possibility of nearby URLs, and interacting and engaging with their visitors. It could be in a retail store, it could be in a museum, it could be in a movie hall. The use cases could be different, but there are a lot of core services that Chrome and Eddystone have exposed through the version 49 onwards, and that is what we are trying to showcase through Eddy platform. Moving on, do you guys consider? I'm sorry, I didn't answer the rotating URLs piece. Rotating URLs are basically the two kinds. They could be used for two purposes. A, from a security point of view, where you do not want someone spoofing on your URLs, or intercepting your URLs. So its first use case is purely from a security point of view. Second is it could be the need of the business. For example, you may want to talk about, or you may want to launch a special happy hours menu from 5 p.m. to 8 p.m., and you can broadcast that specific menu during certain parts of the day. So that could change, or maybe after work hours you may want to get some sort of lead generation form, that's if that's what you want your visitors to see. That can also be done. So there are two use cases for rotating URLs. A, it's security, and B, it's the business need, where you would want to broadcast different URLs at different times of the day. um, do you guys consider partnerships in other countries? Can these beacons be used to track other BLE without the use of application? That's a question by Vito. Yes, we are exploring partnership with different services and companies all over. And if you are looking to partner, then you can drop a note to Perry, and Perry can at perry@beaconstack.com, and he can connect you with the suitable person. The second part of the question is, can these beacons be used to track other BLE without the use of application? So the way it works is, any beacon or any BLE device just broadcasts certain signals. So there has to be a reader of those signals. That reader could be your smartphone. That reader could be another static standalone application. So you can't purely use a network of beacons without a single device or multiple devices, reading those beacons. So there has to be a reader along with a reader to basically read those signals that are being broadcasted by the bunch of these beacons. The last question is by Michelle. What's the best way to explain how beacons work to someone who is not tech savvy? That's an interesting question. Okay, so the way it works is, so to someone who's not tech savvy, these are beacons are at the end of the day dumb broadcasting devices. That's a basic definition. There's no intelligence in them. They are basically signal emitting devices, and the intelligence lies in the smartphone, and the intelligence is to figure out where these beacons are placed, and what do you want to do with those beacons, and how do you want to solve your use cases. I guess that's about it.
Great, Rahul. Yeah, that was a pretty good explanation. Sometimes like to think of beacons as kind of like triggers in a physical space. But they just simply trigger a certain action that's actually the intelligent part of that action, and that use case is done via the platform and via the phone itself. But I appreciate you helping out with those questions, Rahul. We're going to wrap up for tonight. I know it's late for many of you out there. If you have any questions that come up later or that weren't answered fully, feel free to reach out to me at perry@beaconstack.com or to tweet us at our handle at beaconstack. And I also encourage you to really explore our website, www.beaconstack.com, as well as our blog.beaconstack.com, for information on anything from general beacon trends to specific posts on how to actually run a campaign for a variety of businesses, to more information on the Eddy kit and our other beacon kits as well. So thanks for tuning in. It's been a pleasure. I know Devin and I have a lot of fun tonight talking about beacons and Eddystone, and we look forward to see you at our next webinar. Thanks.